Yeah, this is going to be the second lecture. We're going to look at the rise of corporations and what we looked at in class, which was like robber barons versus captains of industry. So I guess to start off, the Gilded Age, one of its defining features is, the number of rich people who are emerged during this time. So if we were, there's a lot of different ways to measure this, but if you were to take history and then you were to like look at how much wealth they controlled at the time, and then you were to kind of put it in today's terms, many of the top folks who have ever existed, as far as like the most rich, is Andrew Carnegie would be worth 372 billion, or 2.1% of the U.S. GDP at the time. Rockefeller controlled 90% of oil production, so 342 billion. So I guess Carnegie is higher up. Yeah, and you got like Mansa Musa, who controlled all the gold in the world way back. Anyway, so I don't know why those are switched. Anyway, Ford 199 billion. In comparison, Bill Gates is worth 138 billion. Or no, Jeff Bezos is worth 138 billion. It's probably worth more now. This was a couple years ago. Anyway, they are making a massive amount of money. And so Vanderbilt is going to make a lot of money on railroads. He basically starts to control railroad lines in the Northeast. Rockefeller is in Standard Oil. And one of the things he's going to do is he cuts deals with railroads, and then he forces other people out of business. So Standard Oil, one of the things about Standard Oil is that it's much cheaper than other oil. At the time, he's also very efficient. He finds ways to make money off of things like charcoal or even gasoline that was just basically thrown away at that time. And so he is very efficient, and he runs his company. He basically runs other companies out of business. And the other thing is he's going to get rebates from railroads so that other people cannot keep up, and he just buys out other companies. Carnegie was the one that we looked at in class in the TV show, and he is a true rags to riches story. He starts out at a cotton factory for $1.20 a week. He kind of works his way up. He is going to work for someone on the Pennsylvania Railroad. He then goes on to develop the industry of iron, and he is also going to have a monopoly. So, J.P. Morgan is another wealthy person at this time who makes $60 million in banking and consolidating different railroads and financing. And so one of the ways that people are making money is called vertical and horizontal integration. So like Carnegie, one of the things he does is vertical integration. And the reason why I can kind of remember vertical integration is like steel, you're building up. People are going to use Carnegie steel for that. But the other example of vertical integration is the cattle industry. So from the time that cow gets onto the cart, from the time it is delivered, they never pay a single dollar to any other business. I think a good example today is like Apple. Once you're in the Apple universe, you never pay another dollar out. Carnegie did the same thing. He owned the mills, he owned the mines, he owned every step of the process. Horizontal is when people buy out other companies. So like this would be Rockefeller Oil, and he buys out smaller independent oil corporations. Most places do both, as did Carnegie Steel, but Rockefeller is most known for this horizontal integration. So, if there was a competing oil company, often what he would do is buy it up, and then he would either sell it or close it down, and just so he controlled up to 90% of the oil industry. If say this guy was not willing to sell, what would he do? He would send out Pinkertons to threaten the guy. He would just lower the price so that eventually he's going to go under, or this guy is going to go under. So it's just buying out other companies. This is similar to, say, like today, if Verizon buys, like with cell phones, buying up other cell phones, this would be horizontal integration. And like I said, vertical integration, I don't know. Like today, if you have like Disney, who makes the movies, and then they are going to buy out an online provider, that would be like vertical integration. They don't want to pay money out to Netflix if they can control their own distribution. So anyway, vertical integration and horizontal integration are the ways that people are making a lot of money. A lot of people look at this as kind of a monster. They're kind of growing beyond that. And not only are they taking out other industries, so here, like this is Standard Oil taking out the oil companies, but because they have so much money, they are also controlling the government, right, and labor. And so these are such behemoths, they are such huge amounts of the American economy that essentially people have to bow down before these corporations. So there is a huge wealth disparity during this time. So you have the Carnegies who are making billions of dollars, and then you have the workers who are like living in the ditch. So the Gilded Age, 2% of the population held 5% of the wealth, and by 1896, 1% of the population owns 30% of the wealth. So after the Civil War, you get a huge disparity, 1% owning 30%. Today, we have a lot of inequality as well. It is actually higher than the Gilded Age. But the top 1% of family took home an average of 26.3 times as much income as bottom 9 today. I think the main difference is folks aren't living in gutters playing with dead horses. This is pretty bad. These kids are living in the city. Where are their parents? Probably working. Where are all the kids who are over like 8 years old? Probably working. What are they left to do? Play with dead horses in the gutter. Anyway, so what is the government doing at the time is what people call laissez-faire or hands-off. But I like to challenge this idea that the government was hands-off, because hands-off is what it was as far as regulation. They are not going to have worker laws to protect workers. They are not going to have minimum wage. They are not going to have any of these sort of like regulations for safety. So in that way it was hands-off. But they are handing out a lot of things to these corporations. We looked before at the Pacific Railway Act, where we're giving land grants to these train corporations. They are handing out subsidies and handouts to these corporations. They are using the army to protect private property and to put down these labor disputes. And they are having a high protective tariff, which is going to help their industry. So while we are not regulating and helping out the workers, we are doing a lot as far as the government during the Gilded Age to hand out to these large corporations. The Supreme Court is also protecting these corporations. So we fight the Civil War for the 14th Amendment, which gives us the equal protection of law. And we looked at Reconstruction, how that did not exactly work out for African Americans. But what happens during the Gilded Age is that corporations are given rights. This is called corporate personhood. So since corporations are people, and that was what they decided, they have protection under the 14th Amendment. So essentially what happens during the Gilded Age in things like Santa Clara County, when states try to regulate or take away property of the Southern Pacific Railroad, the Supreme Court is going to say corporations deserve civil rights and protection, and you cannot take away their property without due process of law. So, some people say that we fought the Civil War to give corporations their rights, which is not true, but is kind of what happened. So during this Gilded Age, you have a lot of cartoons, and what they are kind of saying is like, who has the real power during this time period are these corporations, right? Do we even know about a lot of like the presidents during this time? They are just sort of these bearded nobodies, right? Who has the real power? The Carnegies, the Rockefellers. These are the people with the real power, and essentially they are buying out Congress. So we have a lot of corporations. They pay for these guys, and what are they going to do is they're going to turn back and give out handouts to them. So things like these land deals, protecting them from regulation, giving them the army whenever they have a labor dispute. This is constant during this time. So how are people dealing with this idea that there is a huge income disparity? So like, to go back, how do we say, is this okay? Is it okay to have, folks with top hats living with billions and billions of dollars and these kids living in a gutter. How is this okay? Well, the way the United States sort of like, you know, I guess rationalizes this is this like rags to riches story. People would look at people like Carnegie and they'd be like, you can make it if you try, right? These Horatio Alger wrote these stories called Ragged Dick, who shows how they can you can rise up from your, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Um, he starts out, he finds a quarter in the train, and then he's like, "Oh, I'm not gonna steal. It's mean." And then he invests that quarter in some bootblacking business. He meets a rich guy while he's like shining his shoes, and that guy offers him a job, and then pretty soon he's making millions of dollars. So this idea that rags to riches is the story of America, believing in the American dream. This is helping people believe, well, if Carnegie can do it, I could do it too. The problem is that monopolies are not only bad for, you know, kind of like taking out other business, but it's also bad if you are a laborer. So if I go into a town and there's only one corporation, one steel mill, I cannot go to another steel mill and ask them for better wages. You have to essentially take whatever these major corporations are paying. And what they are paying are very low wages, very long hours, and very unsafe conditions. So 10 to 12 hours a day. We looked at those steel mills who do 12-hour shifts. You have railroad accidents. You have a lot of problems for workers. And essentially what they find is they can't find any other job, so they have to take what is given to them. And so often people show in these cartoons the fact that, these rich people are making their money off of the backs of labor, right? That the reason why they are able to make so much money is they are profiting off of the labor of other people. So, $11 a week, these are the ones who are actually doing the work for the fat cats to sit on top. All right. Unions are going to emerge as a way to counter, right, with big corporations and with these come big labor. And people try to organize to get better condition. The Knights of Labor was inclusive. These include women, minorities, and they had major goals. It was almost like a political party where they advocate for things like 8-hour work days, and they wanted to do things that would affect all labor. The American Federation of Labor is what we think of today as a union. These are bread and butter unionism. So they would ask for specific things like a raise at a specific factory. So, steel workers are going to ask for a raise for their steel workers. They're going to ask for better conditions and these sort of things. So the last one is the IWW, and they are essentially a big union. And what they want to do is just overturn the whole system in communism. So as we look at what happens during the Gilded Age, usually whenever there is a strike, it is going to be put down. So the example we looked at was that Homestead strike, which was in Carnegie Steel. Pinkertons were used as private security to put that down, but then later what happens is the militia is actually brought in to put down the rest of the strike. And so police are also used during this time. The army is used. And essentially the government fears that any of these strikes could have a negative impact on the United States economy. And so it's their job to make sure things keep running. But I guess the other thing they figured was that with private property rights, they had the right to force them out. The unions are going to take a big hit after the Knights of the Haymarket Square. At the Haymarket Square, a riot breaks out after someone throws a bomb. People blame the Knights of Labor and union activists with the bombing, and they are going to become less popular after that. And this is also, the martyrs are going to be May Day. Essentially, they don't know who threw the bomb, but they round up the usual suspects and put them to death. The Homestead strike we talked about. 9 strikers and 7 Pinkertons are killed, and then 8,000 militia are going to arrive on July 12th. So that is one example. Another example is a Pullman Strike. This is the cars. There are 250,000 workers in 27 states, and the railroad brothers oppose the boycott. But the Pullman car workers are going to strike, and then there is kind of like a national strike. The federal government obtains an injunction against it. The army is sent in, and Debs, who's the organizer, is going to go to prison. Some folks who also are kind of, they're not associated with any of the major unions, but they are anarchists, and their ideology is just to kind of be more radical and go after all forms of oppression. An example of an anarchist would be the one who tried to shoot Frick, but was unsuccessful. So these people are trying to resist the corporate power of like low wages and high rents. They're getting squeezed. This is a Pullman car cartoon that is supporting the idea of the laborers, right? Because you have the fat cat kind of squeezing out the quarters out of the workers. And so another kind of example of what people do to try to rationalize these inequality of wealth is like, well, why are poor people poor? And one of the major reasons people are going to come up with is social Darwinism. Darwin never said survival of the fittest. He said that it was survival of the most, adapted. But social Darwinism says survival of the fittest. And so their idea is that why are people rich? Well, because they are better. Should we help the poor? No, we should not help the poor, because if we help the poor, it will lower our standards as a society. Andrew Carnegie sort of believed in social Darwinism. He did not believe that poor people knew what was best for them, but he did believe in philanthropy. He wanted to give people a chance to pull themselves up. So he is going to do things through the gospel of wealth, like libraries and giving people tools to help out. So folks, during this time, as far as presidents, it is very confusing. A lot of it is over Republicans and Democrats. Really, if we look at the difference between the political parties, it's not even that different. Both of them are going to be doing handouts to corporations. Both of them are going to resist regulation. Both of them are corrupt. The main thing that decided who you were, as far as Republican or Democrat, was where you were. So Republicans tended to be Northerners, Southerners were Democrats, and immigrants, like the Irish, were Democrats, and the middle class tended to be Republican. In Garfield, one of the things that's going to happen is we are going to start to get some reform as far as civil service. So part of the corruption was, if I, paid money or helped you get elected, I could expect to get a job. So, one of the main jobs that was great was getting in charge of collecting tariffs, because you could give deals to your friends, or you could skim off the top. And so whenever people were elected, they had to kind of have this time where they handed out jobs to office seekers. So Garfield wanted to reform, but he was in the beginning of his time period. He was handing out jobs to office seeker, and one guy was Crazy Guiteau. He wanted a job as a what do you call it? Ambassador to France, but he had no anyway. So he doesn't get the job. He's going to assassinate Garfield, and he is crazy. I might give you guys something to look at that. The other reform that is passed at this time is the Sherman Antitrust Act, which makes it illegal to restrain trade or commerce. This was meant to control monopolies, but Congress is actually going to use it to break up unions, so it is not used for its original intent. And that is it. So essentially what I want you guys to come away with is you have pretty corrupt government. You have, some regulations are being passed, like civil service, which is supposed to put people in charge who are qualified, not just because they are your friend. But all in all, people are handing out to these corporations. They are doing whatever they want because essentially they are being paid off by these corporations. That is it. Focus on your robber baron or captains of industry during this time for homework. All right, take care.